Connor McDavid and Team Canada didn't hear no bell. The Canadians moving on to play for the gold medal on Sunday.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. This is my 10th season doing digital hockey content, my third as a host here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you've got your team covered every single day. And on today's show, we are going to walk through the remarkable come-from-behind victory the Canadians had earlier today against the Finns. We will start out talking about the narratives, the big picture. In our second segment, we will pivot to dissecting a little bit some of the game decisions, the game management decisions, the strategy. And then in our final segment, we will dive into looking ahead. Now, I'm recording this before the United States plays Slovakia, so we'll have another episode for you guys tomorrow once we know what the gold medal game matchup is, but we'll start looking ahead to Sunday. So to start out, anytime you are in one of these international tournaments, the general expectation is the talent's going to win out. That in small samples, your best bet is riding your best players and dealing with the consequences later. And this game gets off to about as inauspicious of a start as you're going to possibly imagine if you're Canada. To be down 2-0 and getting basically nothing going offensively for the first half of the game is really about as dire as it's gonna get. And all of Canada's weaknesses through the first 30 minutes of this game were the questions we had about this team going into the tournament. What is the defense going to be able to do as far as facilitating transition? How can they contribute in the offensive zone? Beyond your superstars, beyond your McDavid, MacKinnon, Celebrini, where is the rest of your offense going to come from? And this was the first game I really felt a dearth of secondary talent. Now, Canada won the game 3-2. It was not easy. It took 2 power play goals. It took a lot of hard work. And I think that's my first real big takeaway, is that a lot of this Canada comeback is facilitated off of the cycle and off of the forecheck. And Finland, to their credit, did a remarkable job defensively of taking away that center lane until that McKinnon goal with 35 seconds and change to go on the power play, that pass from McDavid. Canada wasn't getting that puck through the center lane, and that was Finland strategically saying, we are going to force you to work for your offense. You are going to have to pass this puck around the perimeter of the offensive zone. You're going to have to settle for point shots. You're going to have to settle for flank shots, and we'll live with that. If we have to play defense to the point we get outshot 2-1, 3-1, we'll take that trade-off because that's largely going to be low-quality offense, and I thought Finland did a really good job in transition other than against McDavid, and that's because no one can stop McDavid in transition. But Canada found a way, largely off of the cycle and off of the rush. You get your power plays. And look, I tweeted it maybe 20 minutes before Sam Reinhart had scored. Where has Sam Reinhart been? This is a guy who's been a fringe Selke caliber winger, who's scored 50 goals in the NHL, who's been close to a point per game in the postseason for a dominant Panthers team. And up until that goal he scored, you could have told me he wasn't even on the team and I would have believed you. But he was in the right place at the right time. And we'll talk about the strategy adjustment Canada made as the game went along in the next segment, so I won't get ahead of myself. But that's what you got to do against UC Saros, against a smaller goalie. You got to get traffic in front. You got to be looking for those redirects and tips. And Reinhart, to his credit, was in the right place at the right time and was able to make that happen. Then you get to the Theodore goal. Again, a testament to working the cycle. Theodore, I thought, had probably his best game of the Olympics so far, and Shea Theodore hasn't played a huge workload in this tournament. Canada's been very heavily reliant on Makar, on Devontae's, on Drew Doughty, on Thomas Harley, and I've always been a Shea Theodore guy, and I think he's a very, very well-rounded player who, in a pinch, could probably be on your first pair, but I think if he's on your second pair, like he is in Vegas for the most part, you have a really good hockey team. And as this game went along and we start talking about narrative ball, where because it's a small sample, because it's one game, we can draw knee-jerk conclusions. We can take big picture decisions out of one game. And it took John Cooper a while to get where I wanted the lineup to be. And we're going to get there in the second segment. I hate to keep teasing, but I do have specific points I want to hit. It took a while for Canada to get it right. And as dire as it's going to get in this type of environment, you're down to nothing. No Crosby. You can't get anything going on offense. You gave up a shorthanded goal to let Finland make it 2-0 on a very nice play by Erik Haula for what it's worth. You have goalie questions that John Cooper is very adamant. I'm not going away from Binnington, even though the rest of us would probably like to see Logan Thompson in there. But when push came to shove, you as an Oiler fan, as an everydayer of Locked On Oilers in your heart of hearts knew, this was going to come down to McDavid and MacKinnon making something happen. And for those guys who it felt like were on the ice every other shift for basically half the game to gut it out, and we've heard Nathan MacKinnon's not at 100%. He's not feeling particularly well. We know they don't have Braden Point, who got injured, wasn't able to come. No Sidney Crosby, who may or may not play in the gold medal game on Sunday. You're dealing with a group that doesn't necessarily have as much offensive firepower as we would have thought, say, a month ago. And for a good 30, 40 minutes of this game, the conversation on social, me included, was, wow, they could use Wyatt Johnston. Wow, they could use Connor Bedard. Wow, they could use Mark Scheifele, because they couldn't get a thing going on offense, because they couldn't get going off the rush. They were playing a lot of dump and chase, but not really retrieving any of the rims and basically giving Finland easy exits because Finland was dropping so deep, because, as we said before, they were so concerted taking away that center lane pass. You were going to have to work it off the cycle, and Oiler fans heard me give the spiel for 2 straight Stanley Cup finals. It's really hard to generate offense off of the cycle consistently because point shots are so low efficient, because they require so much to go right. When you're taking that 4 or 5% shot from the point, there are so many things that can happen in that puck along the way. But by virtue of the slightly smaller rink, because everybody out there is so fast, the point shot was a little more viable in this game. And I do think that's something worth monitoring, especially when you're going to go against the United States, another team that likes to create off of the cycle, because some of their better players, the Tkachuk brothers in particular, are not the most fleet of foot, and working off of the cycle allows them to use their best traits, namely their size. But the last point I wanted to make before we called it on our first segment, Connor wore the C today. For the first time since 2006, somebody else wore the C with NHL players at the Olympics other than Sidney Crosby. Connor McDavid, because of the IIHF rules where somebody needs to be designated captain, Connor got to wear the C. And I know there was a contingent out there licking their chops to once again dunk on McDavid for not getting the job done in a big moment. Like, it's his fault they lost to the Panthers in either of the last 2 finals, just because people resent greatness, for lack of a better expression. You know, LeBron got this his entire career. Sid got this for a good chunk of his career till he reached elder statesman status. But you look at the way McDavid plays and you tell me he's the problem, that he's the reason we can't get it done. And that's what I mean when I say narrative ball. Because in a team sport, we're judging the player's value on the overall outcome, whether or not they won or lost, we get lost in the weeds. Make no mistake about it. Connor McDavid's the reason Canada won this game. Yeah, McKinnon scored the goals. Yes, McKinnon got on the sheet on a great pass from McDavid. McDavid is the engine. We've been talking about it on the show for a week and a half now. When in doubt for John Cooper, it is get McDavid out there and we'll figure out the rest later. Now, as an Oiler fan, I don't love the fact he's playing like 27 minutes a night as a forward in a tournament that's not going to be the Stanley Cup playoffs. But I get it, because if I had Connor McDavid on my bench, I would be sending him over the wall every other shift as well, because that's the best hockey player in the world. And when you have access to that, he's going to rise the tide for everyone else out there. He's going to bring out the best of McKinnon, of Celebrini, of Makar, of Taze. We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we will dive into just that, the coaching decisions, the strategy decisions Canada made throughout the course of this game that ultimately allowed them to pull off the comeback. Have you ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right. Flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about what team can make a title run, this is a great time to lock in. I love futures this time of the year. Whether it's picking a team to win the championship or their conference, it adds an extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch and makes the basketball experience all the more engaging. And now, not only can your pick cash, you could go to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on any NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you so much to everybody hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are breaking down the Team Canada come from behind win against the Finns. But before we get there, if you're an everydayer, you check out these parts often, you got to check out the Everydayer Club. The details are down in the show notes. And March 6th is coming up fast, and the trade rumors are flying. Get a free month in our Everydayer Club for a limited time by using promo code DEADLINE. You'll get the inside track in our private Discord to talk trades in real time. Skip the ads on this show all season long. Join now at the link down in the show notes. And as we continue this conversation about this win, number one, Canada has real issues on the back end. Ultimately, they were able to make it work, but the volume of guys who are on this team for their defense and for their physical ability to take up space because of their size, it leaves Canada at a disadvantageous position when it comes to offensive creation. And I understand the way this roster is assembled. They're not trying to play from behind. Obviously, no one is. It's the least ideal game state because you become predictable. Opponents know what's going to come at them. But when you're playing from behind and you need to facilitate chances, and note I use the word chances and not offense, because when you are down and you are down multiple goals the way Canada was at one point in this game, it's not just we need a goal. It's how can we create a continued sustained pressure that's going to lead to goals, plural. Anybody can tell their best player, hey, go score a goal. You know, in an ideal world, yeah, McDavid or McKinnon just bobs and weaves through all the traffic, scores off the rush, and you're in. But in this type of environment that is so fast and so sound fundamentally, you are going to have to work. And part of my working theory of hockey that I'm developing, it's not just we want good players. It's we want good players that can facilitate what we're looking for. And the more multifaceted, like a lot of these guys on Team Canada are, where they're good at a lot of things, but not necessarily great at any one thing. I think of guys like Sam Reinhart. I think of guys like Seth Jarvis, who are really talented, but I wouldn't say are elite at any one thing. Those types of guys are going to do a good job of facilitating an overall good game environment. But the counterpoint to that, and part of the problem, and I did see somebody say this, it feels like this roster is assembled for a Stanley Cup playoff run with all of the role players. When you think about the guys I just mentioned, Brad Marchand, Tom Wilson, Brandon Hagel, Sam Bennett, when you think about guys like that who have very specialized skill sets, who are good at just one thing or two things as opposed to being well-rounded, when those guys go over the wall in a situation that's not really conducive to what you're looking for, you're not facilitating the type of offensive environment you're necessarily looking for in trying to facilitate that multi-goal comeback. And that gets to the crux of the problem Canada had in this game. Because they have so many of those types of guys, they don't really have that same offensive wave ability. And when I say wave ability, I mean, when you can have line after line after line come over the wall, gain the offensive zone, start to go to work, try and wear you down, make you make mistakes, force you into disadvantageous game situations, it becomes a challenge to create offense because then we're ultimately, and Oiler fans are very familiar with this problem, you're relying on one or two lines to do basically all of the offensive work. And this Team Canada win, very reminiscent of what we've seen from the Oilers this year, where beyond the one defensive pair and beyond the one or two forward lines, the depth isn't doing a lot to facilitate offensive chance creation. And to their credit, they took this game away from the Finns. I think if Finland had a little bit more juice down the backstretch, they could have found a way to put this game away. But ultimately, Canada's talent won out in the long run. Now, I don't think Canada played a particularly good game, but the concerted effort to get traffic, the concerted effort to create point shots, and give Zararis something to work against, I should say, is ultimately what wore this game down. Now, as a brief aside, I do think McKinnon sold the high stick a little. You got to call it, but I do think he whipped his head back a little dramatically, but that got you on the sheet. You got the power play earlier in the game on the Reinhart redirect. All of this is to say, Canada won today in less than ideal circumstances. This is a roster that is largely designed to play against the U.S. They have really put together a group built to wear down opponents, to work the cycle, to forecheck, to pressure. And when you're trailing by multiple goals, it feels almost impossible to score that way because it's hard. That's the key here. They have a lot of guys who are good at that work, at creating off the cycle, of working the forecheck, of generating point shots. The problem is it's not a very efficient way to play. So when you're chasing a multiple goal lead, it feels like you need to play perfect hockey for 2 straight periods if you want to score 2 or 3 straight goals, because you got to think about the volume of things you need to go right if you're going to pull that comeback off. So at 2-0, we need 1 just to get on the sheet, just to show we have a pulse. And we got to string together 1 long pass, 2 long pass. Okay, we're through the neutral zone. We've gained the zone. Okay, that's already 3. We've gained the offensive zone with speed. We do our layoff drop pass or we send it in deep. That's another one. We're at 4. We got to get everybody into the zone. That's 5. We got to find our first pass once we've retained possession, if we've dumped it in, or if we've continued to attack the net. Did we send it across for a cross-team pass? Did the pass get through? Did we take it to the net ourselves? Did we create a rebound? And that's just to get the first scoring chance. And then you think about it in the context of, okay, we couldn't get a clear lane to the goal attacking off of the rush. So we need to get our 5 in the zone. We need to work the perimeter. Now, we have the puck along the boards. Do we have a shooting lane? No. Okay, we got to move the puck. Do we have a passing lane? No. Okay, I got to move my feet to get to somewhere where I can move the puck. And we're already at 10 variables, and we're talking about 1 or 2 scoring attempts. And by and large, to Finland's credit, they're low danger. They're from the perimeter. They're from the point. They're from our odd or sharp angles. And to Canada's credit, they got a lot of heat on Zararis from tight angles. They hit his helmet 3 or 4 times. Celebrini had 2 really good opportunities. McKinnon had 1 really good opportunity where Haula had tied up his stick on the back door. I thought Canada, as the game went along, got a little bit better, but the adjustments were subtle. I think the biggest one for me, getting Makar and Taze out there with the McKinnon, Celebrini, McDavid line, that really tipped it, because to the larger point I've been making, you need to facilitate as much offense as you can. And to be giving that trio of forwards an offensive zone start with Sanheim and Doughty as the defensemen, and look, I like both. I think Doughty and Sanheim are both good, but they don't facilitate offense in the same way that a Makar does, a Taze does, even Thomas Harley to a lesser extent. You want to get that puck up the ice. You want to be able to get good shot attempts from the point and really put heat on the other team. And it took a while for John Cooper to get where I wanted these forward lines to be. And now, you won. You've got a day and a half to regroup. You have a game Sunday, middle of the day time in Italy. You got a lot of work to do. You just played your big dogs 24, 25 minutes in a 60-minute game. You got to see what happens in the what happens in the United States-Slovakia game later today. But if I'm Canada, I definitely am feeling like I need to lick my wounds after that win. We're going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we'll dive into some of the considerations Canada has going into the final on Sunday. Thank you so much to everybody that is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are walking through Canada's big come-from-behind win against the Finns in the Olympic semifinals of the men's ice hockey tournament. And now, all attention pivots to Sunday. If you are Canada, you expected to be here. If you're Canada, you feel like this is supposed to be your coronation. You came into this tournament as the betting favorite. You have yet to lose a game. You have faced tremendous adversity in your two playoff round games, in your Czechia game and in your Finland game. You have faced tremendous adversity where you have needed to mount serious, full-throated, almost game-long comebacks, and you haven't played particularly well. You really only have one forward line and one defensive player playing particularly well, especially when it comes to offense and chance creation. Your captain, Sidney Crosby, is probably going to attempt to gut it out on Sunday, but what state will he be in? How effective will he be? Will he largely be symbolic like Victor Hedman was for Sweden in their elimination game against the U.S., where Hedman got injured in warm-ups and wanted to stay on the bench in uniform? Is that what we're talking about here? Is that the best way to use the 13th forward? I don't necessarily know. If it were up to me, I'd probably do it. I know John Cooper has not used Sam Bennett basically at all when Bennett's been in the lineup, even though he hasn't been in the lineup for every game. I think you have seen as aggressive a minute split in an Olympics with NHL players as I can recall. And I think that's largely a product of Canada trailing in the two playoff games so starkly. But it's been a real difference between the round robin stage and the knockout stage. And that's not exactly groundbreaking analysis. The quality of competition in the round robin versus in the playoffs is different. When you're in the knockout stages, you're playing the best teams from the other groups, and the style of play is going to be different. It's going to be closer to an NHL game where you don't necessarily have the talent advantages that you do in the group stage, where even if it's not going particularly smoothly, the talent gap is so wide, you can still run up the score. Whereas in the game against Czechia, in the game against Finland, Canada has really had to grind it out and really had to work hard. It is tiring. It is taxing to have to play the style of play Canada has had to, and to ride the same players the way Canada has in this tournament. Now, if Sid's going to play, my supposition is he's going to have to be pretty effective, because there's the anecdote all the Penguins fans have been talking about for the last 2 days. We talked about it with Hunter Hodes on Locked On NHL yesterday. Game 7, 2009 Stanley Cup Final. Sid wasn't 100%. He was dealing with a nagging injury. He didn't really try and force his way into the lineup all too much because he didn't really want to be a hindrance. Yes, he dressed. Yes, he played. But he didn't play anything near his normal workload because he knew it would have been a detriment to the team if he tried to play through the injury to his normal level. Now, we'll see whether or not that holds true here. I do think you have that overarching, this could be it. And I've said it 1,000 times in the last 3 weeks. I wouldn't be shocked if Sid was at the 2030 Olympics, but I also at the same time wouldn't be surprised if he retired after next year and we never saw him again. He just retired to Nova Scotia and we never saw him again. He'd show up at the Hockey Hall of Fame. He'd show up when certain Penguins got their number retired in Pittsburgh. But beyond that, I'm not going to be surprised if we never see Sid again after he retires, because he just hasn't ever really been that public facing of a guy. You have that overarching story. You have the fact that McDavid is the guy now. And I know Pierre LeBrun wrote that column in The Athletic. That was ludicrous. It's been McDavid's league. McDavid has had the torch since like 2018 or 19. And if you want to talk about it in the Team Canada context, I suppose you could say McDavid is taking the torch now. But look at the way McDavid has been used in this tournament and what John Cooper has asked of him. John Cooper has asked Connor McDavid to put this team on his back in the offensive zone, doing all the dirty work. And that's the thing that I find so fascinating about the way John Cooper has used McDavid and MacKinnon. They're doing the dirty work for Celebrini to take these shots. That's why Celebrini has the 5 goals in this tournament. McDavid and MacKinnon are the ones who are carrying the puck through the neutral zone with speed. They're establishing offensive possession. They're giving trailers time to catch up. They pull so much attention towards themselves on the flanks. It's only natural Celebrini's going to be able to leak himself into a dangerous area, put himself in a good position to rip that one-timer. And do I wish Connor would just bully his way to the net a little bit more, a la the way Nate does? Yeah, of course. But John Cooper has given those guys a very specific role, and it is being the scoring line. And obviously, in an ideal world, you want to have 2 or 3 scoring lines, especially at an Olympics where you have as much talent, or at least access to as much talent as Canada does. But the offense has been really challenging to come by for them in the knockout stages of this tournament because the quality of competition is better. The defensive strategy is a lot more sound. And ultimately, when you are in these rock fights where these are 1-goal games for 50 odd minutes and you are grinding away at it one shift at a time and really trying to win what's effectively a tug of war, you want to put your best players in the best possible position. And that means riding them as much as they have. And John Cooper, if it were up to him, would play those 3 guys with Taves and Makar for 60 straight minutes because that gives Canada the best chance to win. He can't do that because they're mortal. But at the same time, you watch the workload, you look at the responsibilities and the expectations. That tells you all you need to know about this group. This group will be defined by what Connor McDavid is able to do in the gold medal game. Now, I'm happy for Nathan MacKinnon, who was able to score. We know McKinnon's not at 100%. We know he doesn't have that same natural tenacity or vigor he usually does. I felt genuinely happy for him that he got to be the one to score that goal because he needed it. And jokingly on yesterday's show, I had talked about how in Chris Pronger's column, he had said, is anybody else on this team going to be asked to do anything beyond McDavid? They say McKinnon's the best player in the world. Then how come he needs to play with McDavid to drive offense? Well, he's not at 100%, and it's unfortunate for Canada. But the reality is you're looking down the barrel at another 1-goal game against the United States on Sunday, assuming the U.S. beats Slovakia, which they should. They're a heavy favorite, and they have significantly more talent. Don't ever count anyone out because that's the nature of these 1-game formats. You only got to get lucky once, and Slovakia has shown the ability to play with the best hockey countries in the world and give them a bit of a scare, including the Finns, who they beat outright to start this tournament. I think there's a real chance you're looking at another game very reminiscent of what we saw at the Four Nations face-off last February, where when the chips are down, both teams are missing guys, both teams dealing with injuries, you're going to have to answer the bell. And as I said last year, going into that game, that Thursday night Four Nations face-off final, I'm taking the team with McDavid and MacKinnon on it. Now, if Sid plays, that's another factor. How healthy everyone is, it's another factor. All I know is I cannot stress to you enough how awesome this is. I've been talking about NHL players going back to the Olympics since 2014, since the last time they went. And my guys, McDavid is having the full circle moment. I talk about that story, that anecdote of Connor asking his parents to help him write Sidney Crosby a letter when McDavid was 5 and Crosby was 15 about how he handles pressure and how to do the best job he possibly could because Connor knew he wanted to be great. And I go to this one, and we'll get out of here on this note. I go to this one Nick Saban anecdote a lot because you have to make sacrifices. You have to make decisions. You know, sometimes you're not going to be able to hang out with your friends, hang out with your significant other. You're not going to be able to go out on the weekend because you got to do the work. You got to grind. You got to get something done. And you have to make the less ideal choice. You have to make a sacrifice. And the difference between great players and good players is what great players are willing to give up to get there. Now, in an ideal world, everybody would always be doing their best and everyone would be great. But the differentiation point between great players and good players is the ones who are willing to do what it takes to win. And McDavid playing every other shift for half of this game, at least anecdotally, that's the difference between a good and a great player. And Canada's going to have a chance at another gold medal in men's hockey at the Olympics, largely because of the work Connor McDavid did in this game against Finland. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everybody that made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out NHL Game Night for more on the action. If you are watching over on YouTube, we send you to the first ever 24/7 national Locked On YouTube channel. Subscribe to Locked On Oilers wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. I will be back tomorrow where we will preview the gold medal game, which will probably be Canada-US, but it'd be fun if it was Canada-Slovakia. I will talk to you guys then. Until then, let's go Oilers. let's go Canada. And I really do hope Sidney Crosby gets to play.